I'm Ariana Grande.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Erivo.
And you're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
Visit bpm.fm to discover more.
Hi, I'm Ariel Stachel, and welcome to the Theater Podcast with Alan Seals.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Theater Podcast with Alan Seals. That is me. I'm your host, Alan Seals, and our guest is Ariel Stachel, who is a Tony and Grammy Award winner who you know from the Broadway scene. And I just have to say this episode is one of the most powerful and deeply honest and personal ones that we've had in a little bit of a while here. A little bit of a while? I don't know. It's early for me. So Ari and I, we dig into what it really means to put your whole self on stage with anxiety and identity and the compulsion he just felt to write this one-man show called Other that is opening down in the Village here in New York off-Broadway. And unsurprisingly, he gets into the fact that he treats his performing like an athlete would train for the Olympics. I mean, we talk about this all the time, and how actually therapy became one of his most important tools after talking to one of his good friends and getting advice from this person, Leslie Odom Jr., and the only way that he can feel his art really matters. As he puts it, it isn't about acting, it's about survival, honesty, and learning to hold hands with the parts of yourself that you are sometimes trying to hide, or not sometimes, oftentimes. Can't wait to share this with you. Make sure you're following the podcast on social media. Watch the video version of this on Spotify and Patreon. And now everybody, please enjoy this episode with Ariel Stachel.
Here you go. 1, 2, 3.
Today we're joined by a Tony and Grammy Award-winning actor, singer, and writer whose career spans Broadway, film, and television. He won the 2018 Tony Award for originating the role of Haled in Band's Visit on Broadway, and screen credits include Don't Worry Darling, Zola, and The Night Agent. Now he's bringing his very deeply personal new one-man show called Other to the off-Broadway stage, which explores identity, anxiety, and the search for belonging. Ariel Stachel, welcome to the Theater Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm happy to be here.
And we are recording in the midst of final rehearsals before your show opens, right? Are you in tech yet?
We are starting tech tonight. I just finished an incredibly grueling first week of rehearsals. Solo shows are done a little bit differently than sort of ensemble shows. I think you can rehearse like 3-4 hours a day, and by the fourth hour, you're toast.
Like, what is that like for you? You know, rehearsing versus in the other shows you were in, and especially like Band's Visit, which was such a massively huge ensemble piece, right? Mm-hmm. Like everybody was on stage all the time. Like, how does that compare to this?
Well, it's a completely different thing. I mean, on so many different levels. Like on one level, it's my own writing, so that's already its own thing. But as a performer, it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It would be like the difference between taking a walk and running a marathon, which is not to.
I'm trying to figure out which is which. Okay, so taking a walk is Band's Visit.
Well, it's a 90-minute show. I had one song. I mean, actors talk about this. Like, there are levels to this, right? Like, every role in every Broadway show is not created equal. So I would say that this is a marathon. This is a complete marathon. I mean, usually before I go on stage, I sort of take a breath and I'm like, okay, because once you're on, you don't stop. You don't have any moment for a break. You don't get to reset. Whatever feelings you're carrying with you, they go on stage and it is live. And so it's a little masochistic.
Well, how do you prepare for that versus, I mean, you're not even in preview set and getting opening. So like, obviously I'm sure you're like chilling, and rehearsals are obviously the intense time leading up to opening. In addition to the press engagements like this one you got to do to promote the show, right? Yeah. So how are you preparing for this in this time, the one-man show versus, you know, what you've done in the past? Like, are you just like going into hibernation outside of rehearsal?
Yeah, I mean, literally like vocal rest. Like the only time I'm talking is with you, and then I'll shut my mouth. I mean, it is a massive task. The way that I'm prepping is complete vocal silence. That's one thing, but it's more psychological, spiritual, emotional than anything else, because you got to be on stage by yourself for 90 minutes. And I would say that each minute on stage is like an hour in life. You know what I mean? Like it's like dog years. In some ways, I would say
Right.
you know what I mean? Like you think, oh, 90 minutes is an hour and a half. That's not what on stage every second you're being looked at and you need to communicate and guide an audience. And so the way that you prepare is by trying to release as much as possible, but also trying to sort of connect to your why, because the why is kind of what gets you through it, and the why is the way in which I find I can find a level of relaxation on stage. And what you're going for at some point is like some kind of Zen relaxation. You're trying to be in control. You're trying to also be free, and so like you're trying to hit this very, very sweet spot, and you don't get it every moment on stage. You don't have it every second, but usually there are stretches during the show where you're sort of in that kind of zone. And so what you're trying to do is trying to get yourself as prepared as possible to be free, to feel confident, to feel comfortable, and then just the basics. Like you really have to treat it like an athlete. You got to eat. Like I've done shows where I tried intermittent fasting, almost died after 30 minutes. So there's also just like a rigor. So there's like a rigorousness. You know, there's like a rigorousness that you need to treat yourself with, and I treat it like an athlete, honestly.
Well, that's goes with the metaphor that we've said on this podcast for a bajillion years. Is like Broadway is the Olympics of theater. So the Olympians are always going to put their health first, their physical health and their mental health first, to make sure that they can give the best performance, whatever's possible. So, that's completely understandable.
Well, I'll tell you actually a funny story. So I called my friend Leslie Odom Jr. before this started, and I was like, "Yo,
hold
man,
on, did your toes hurt? You dropped a name on it. You okay?
My toes hurt a little bit, but
okay,
but it's important." I was like, "Bro, what do you suggest? Like, how do I deal with this? Because Leslie also lead produced Pearly, so we understand what it's like to sort of not just be the actor, but sort of come in with a lot of hats on, which I'm coming in." And I thought he was going to give me some answer about regimen, whatever. He's like, "You got a therapist?
Ooh,
you got a good therapist? Get your ass one." That was the first thing. That was the first thing he said. It's really about your head. It's really about managing stress.
right?
Because the thing is, like, there's a lot of noise. It's New York City. It's a lot of pressure, and ultimately, what you're trying to do is calm yourself down enough to just tell your story and do what you do. But in order to do that in the most competitive, high stakes environment in the country, it's a podcast. Your head.
Yeah, you got to keep your head straight.
Yeah,
yeah,
dude.
Yes,
the first thing you said, you got a therapist, get you one. And
wow.
Every other Broadway star that I could name drop would say the same thing.
Yes. As someone who has talked to, 450 some people now on these episodes, I would 100% agree that whenever people are feeling stressed out, like go to therapy, talk about things, like figure out why you're doing what you do. And when you can put it in perspective like that, then it gives you the motivation to kind of like tune everything else out. And exactly what you were saying. But to the why of all of this, though, I'm fascinated behind the story of Other, because I mean, I heard lead producer LaShawn's name dropped there too. Lead producer LaShawn's is stated like this show is for everyone who has ever felt othered, and I want to dive into that straight away, because I think that's going to lead into my normal questions of like, why did you get into theater, and where did you come from, etc.
Sure.
But like, why are you doing this? Why did you write this? Because it is a deeply personal, very emotional story you are putting on stage now.
Yeah. So I'll give you a number of. So the first thing that I'll tell you is that I think that I felt a little bit disillusioned from what the life of an actor was. Like when I was in high school, it was just like, I just want to be an actor, right? And then you audition for college, and I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to NYU, and yay, I'm at NYU, and now I want to be on Broadway. And you're looking at your classmates, and which one of us is going to make it? And I made it, and then I got a Tony for it, right? So like within like 4 years of graduating from undergrad, I'd sort of achieved what many would call the pinnacle. And I started to feel like, and no shade to anyone else who loves this, but like I would get auditions and I was like, why? I always asked why. Like, what is, like, why I don't know. It'd be like a detective, and I like or in my case, like Salim Mahaturba from like some made up Middle Eastern country. And I was just like, why am I doing this? Like, there's this machine. And I felt like in many cases, people were pursuing things for fame, for attention, or for money. And the reason why we got into it completely gets lost in this sort of grind mill of the industry and
Yeah.
of status and of clout. And so, like, the barometer that people are measuring projects on is like, who's attached? What's their name? How famous are they? And without shading any projects that I've done projects with really famous people and didn't give a shit at all.
Yeah.
I didn't care. Why are we telling the story? And so, and the other half of it is that like I come from a like my mom is someone whose whole life is about service. Like she has an organization that brings solar energy to clinics in Africa. And so in the back of my mind, there's like, why am I doing this? And like what service am I providing with the skills that I've received, with my God-given talent and with what I've trained to do? And so without sounding like patting myself on the back, I felt like I wanted to tell something that could matter. I wanted to tell something that um, could create conversation, that could create transformative experiences, both for myself and for the people in the room with me. And I think that the most magical thing about theater, when it's done right, is that we go into this small room in the dark and there's a contract. People are telling a story on stage and people are listening to it. And the beauty of that, if you do it right, is that it creates this opening and an intimacy and a vulnerability that we don't do every day in life. Like when we go and have dinner with people, like, we're scratching on the surface or coffee dates, right? But like theater gives us permission to go where we need to go as human beings that we often don't go every day in our lives. And so I was really struggling with anxiety. And I was, sitting in my dressing room at the band's visit with a bottle of whiskey and vape pens full of weed and like hiding it and like going around and being like, oh, my life is so good, but like I couldn't function. I literally would finish the show, hit my vape once, twice, three times, however many times I needed to just go say hi to people after the show.
Wow.
Like, what's going on with me? And as that happened, I started seeing people, public figures, come out with their mental health stories, like even NBA players like Kevin Love. And I used to want to be an NBA player. So when he said that, it meant something to me. It made my shoulders drop. It made me stand a little taller. I'm not alone, right? And so I endeavored to create a story that used my own struggles and my own experiences, not to do therapy, but to create a piece of entertainment that could create conversation. And that if I was really doing my duty and my service as an artist, it was gonna have to cost me something. Why else do art? And if it costs me something, it means something to other people. And I found that the deeper that I went and the more personal I went and the more specific I went, the more it cracked people open. And I'm talking a lot because I'm passionate about it. But when we did the first run at Berkeley Rev, I walked down the stairs at the end of the show, and there were usually, people. And it wasn't like, hey, can I get your autograph? Hey, can we talk? Can we have a selfie? It was like, yo, the story that you shared reminded me of when I hid my identity. And there were people in their 70s where like, it reminds me of when my parents were in internment camps,
Oh, wow.
Japanese.
Wow.
And I hid my Japanese identity. And so I really feel, without sort of like, coming off as pretentious, that it is the greatest service that I could provide with the talents that I've been given and all of the training that I've done in my life.
It's really interesting. As you're sitting here telling me this story, the one thing that me now in my mid 40s, my 45th birthday is coming up soon. And I'm like,
Right.
I'm doing the whole, what's my purpose? Have I been making the right choices? Like not full on midlife crisis, but I've had my moments, right? And it's the why of what we do that I have to keep going back to. And while you're sitting here telling me the story that you just said, I'm like, yeah, everybody doesn't want to feel alone, yet they still feel like they are all the time for the most part. Because as we move on where we are, especially in our culture here in the US, it's so much like fame and fortune driven, and how much social clout do you have, and making everyone think that you have this great life. And
Yep.
it's just not the way to go. And now, like what you said though about, bringing people saying like, yeah, I didn't realize that I felt that way too, or now I don't feel alone, or even the fact that you wrote this because you heard someone else say it too. It's become it's snowball effect.
Yeah.
Of like, the more you can perform your work, the more you can tell your intimate personal stories that may seem unique and isolating at the time. All of a sudden, everyone else is like, oh shit, me too.
Totally. And I just want to add one thing that like it wasn't a rational choice to write this. It was a compulsion and it was a need. And when I started writing it, I really so when I won the Tony, I went on stage and I had this triumphant speech about how I'd hid my whole life and I'd finally come into my own as a Middle Eastern person. And like that was the story that I was telling. But my life was so much more complex than that. And so when I started writing it, I thought it was a story that had a really happy ending, which is like, hey, and we'll get into this later, but a lot of the stories about hiding my Middle Eastern background. And I thought like, if you just accept yourself, like you'll find the answer. And I did, right. But I was also dealing with this anxiety. And and so when we get into sort of the process of writing it, I realized that was the deepest, most vulnerable thing that I could share. And that the anxiety was really interacting with my identity. And it wasn't an identity-centered story. It was a story about anxiety and the way that identity interacts with it.
Was your anxiety coming from how you identify or hiding how you identify?
The anxiety was coming from hiding my anxiety. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Look, I mean, it's a chicken or the egg question. Like, no doubt that there's real prejudice in the world. No doubt that there are people who feel scared because of what they look like or what they believe in or what background they come from. And that's very real, right? But in my case, the extremity with which I took it, and, one of the, igniting or catalyst moments in the show is being this Jewish Arab kid, 10 years old when 9/11 happens, and getting called Osama bin Laden or terrorist enough that I literally decided to try and hide my dad and pretend I was not Middle Eastern for like 8 years, right? So it's like on some level it was survival. On another level, it was a really anxious way of reacting to that moment. And so the play tries to sort of untangle these things, but there are no clear answers, right? Like the world is shitty for certain people at times, but we have a relationship with ourselves with our own anxieties, and we can choose to deal with that. We have some agency. We have a lot of agency, is what I learned in my writing.
Don't go anywhere. We're going to take a quick commercial break. All right, everyone. Now we're back. Well, you said it was a compulsion to have to write this, though. Why did you, to have catharsis? I was going to say deal with it, but that sounds kind of weird. To process this, to have the catharsis, to bring it to the surface instead of burying it inside. Why did you have to write something? Why not go out and do concerts? Why not sing other people's work? Like, why did you bring this as intimate as you could?
Well, there's this other layer that we haven't spoken about yet, which is that I am a Jew of Mizrahi background, which means that Mizrahi is called the Jews who come from the Arab countries. And in the United States, there's not a lot of those kinds of Jews. In the United States, it's what we call a lot of Ashkenazi Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was raised around my dad, who's Yemenite, and like a couple of his friends who were Jews of Yemeni descent. And so I really, really felt alone. And you ask the compulsion. The compulsion is that I've never felt understood. I've always had to sort of like qualify. People really like, no matter how many times I tell people like, no, I'm Jewish. Like, oh, well, it's okay. So your dad's Arab and your mom's Jewish. No. Both of my parents are Jewish. My mom is an Ashkenazi Jew and my dad is a Yemenite Jew. And people still like, but you look Arab. Yes. I am a Jew from the Arab world. Like
all of that is true.
All of that is true, right? But it's like, for whatever reason, because we don't have that context here, people like don't get it. And so, like, the other compulsion is this need to be understood, this need to be seen, and feeling like there's this gap of understanding of what Jewish people are and who I am and my people. And somehow it felt like problematic to me. And so I didn't write the story to wave a flag, but in telling my story, and the show is not I am a brown Jew, I am a brown, it's not that. It's like it's a story about a kid grappling with his anxiety and trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to sort of deal with it. But it also is a story of a person who is a Jew of Yemenite descent. And that's exciting for me to like tell people that and have people listen to that and have these moments on stage where I get to share aspects of this culture that has felt like has lived in this little tiny silo of like my own small community. And, you know, I actually started writing it long before, you know, what I would call is a really massive onslaught of anti-Semitism. But that also becomes in my mind a way of combating it by saying like, look at the full spectrum of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Interesting you said that, the combating it. There's an advertisement in a subway station that I frequent almost daily that right now it's advertising for like an LGBTQ film festival.
yeah.
And literally it's like, come to the festival. Queer film is a form of protest. And I look at that almost every morning and I'm like, yeah, that's true. And in a way, because you know, there's especially who we have now controlling the media, trying to control the media and putting out there what's getting put out there, to have stories that are of underrepresented people and are like an Arab Jew. You're right. I can't name, other than you now, if you were just like, stop me on the street, quick, name your first Arab Jew that you know of. I'm like, I don't know.
Zero.
I don't know. And
yeah,
I'm sure there's tons out there, especially here in New York. And I just don't know.
there are, but you know, I'll take that and raise you 50, which is that the most radical thing to do is write a story that centers a person, but isn't about that.
Yes.
It's about them being a person.
Yes.
And so, you know, I have to give my director, Tony credit, who is a genius director for solo shows. The last one he did was Latin History for Morons, but the one
John
that
Leguizamo, yep.
John Leguizamo,
Yeah.
name drop, boom, my
Mhm.
feet hurt. But it was him who was like, I don't think this show is really just about identity. And I, as an actor who, you know, I think a lot of the way that we as artists of color get attention is being like, look at me, I'm this,
Mm-hmm.
I'm that, right? And that's how we like carve our space in the marketplace, but at the disservice of our own art, to the disservice of our own humanity, because the only thing that I want to write about isn't just that, it's the human being living life, right? And that's the thing that makes the story, and that's why LaShawn, going back to LaShawn, why she says it's for everyone, because my director pushed me to tell a story that got to the core of what I was going through as a human. And that is what cracked open this story and made it not a flag waving identity piece, but a piece about a human being who is this thing and is dealing with what it means to be a Jew of Yemeni descent in the context of a broader life. So again, I think that the greatest act of resistance is not writing to what people want you to write. It's writing the truth. And I think it's a trap that a lot of artists can get into when they're trying to get their stuff produced and wanting to sort of make it feel important and make the pitch of like, this is the story. No one's ever heard the story about XYZ, da, da, da. And so I think that's also why it's taken me 7 years to write, to also like clear my own internal pressure of writing to that, but instead writing this story about a human being. And it's hard to know when you're feeling sort of subconscious pressure to write to that expectation rather than write to what you really need to write about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It really does. And
your head's spinning a little bit.
No, I just no. It does. It is. And when you said, you know, make bring in characters that are not your typical characters, but don't make their differences the focal point of the plot. I think that is key, and because it normalizes it. And one of the first times I ever really noticed this was I think I was talking with Brandon Uranowitz years ago when he was in Burn This. With that
name drop.
Yeah. And his character was an openly gay man where being gay had nothing to do with the plot. And he had told me at that time, and this was, 2018, I want to say, 2019? It was before the pandemic. And he was saying that that was the first time in his entire career when he got to do that, when he was playing a gay man where it wasn't the comedic sidekick, where it wasn't the best friend or a plot point, right? It just was. And it was so much of a normalization for him, a catharsis for him, that all of a sudden he can just kind of be more of himself on stage, and it carries into his real life. And then now ever since he said that, I've been noticing when TV shows or movies or whatever I'm writing just happens to be like, all right, I got a teenage son, daughter, whoever, and they just happen to have a same-sex love interest, and it's not
Totally.
like, oh, look, they look, it just is.
Totally.
And I
Totally
love that, and I appreciate the writers and the studios that promote that.
Yeah. I mean, it's I just wanted to add one more thing, which is to say that the compulsion you asked me about, well, the compulsion was that I realized that unless I wrote my own story, I would always be acting on terms that other people saw me in and not my own.
Oh, yeah.
And, we'll go back. I want to talk about the play, but we'll go back to the band's visit for a second, right? When I first got the audition for the band's visit, I didn't get the role of Haled, who's an Egyptian character. And I called my agent after and I said, but I want to play an Israeli character. And they said, no, that's not how they're casting. And I said, why? And there wasn't an answer. But the answer was, in their minds, the Israeli characters were Jews in the way that Americans see Jews, which is Ashkenazi, and that the Egyptians were brown, like me. And that really hurt me. That really upset me, because I felt like here's an opportunity to really show Jews the way that I know that they are. And not only that, in that town in Israel, it would have been all the Yemenite and Moroccan immigrants. That's really the town it was based off of. But so that was another thing that made me say, there's this thing. I will not be seen as Jewish unless I literally write my own story.
So then you said you've been writing this for 7 years? You've been writing
7 years is when I started writing it.
So 7 years, it's 2025 now. That means 2019, right? 18. 2018, you started this. And when Band's Visit was right around that time. Was Band's Visit, did that kick you in this need where all of a sudden you didn't, you needed to feel seen and
I've
express
always
this?
felt the need to create something like that. That was before Band's Visit ever existed. I mean, I started writing what I would say were monologues from this show in college during a dramatic writing class at NYU. So it was always a thing. And when I was kicking around auditioning and not getting things out of school, I would go to Starbucks and I'd write 2 pages about what it felt like to be me, I remember. But I never quite had the confidence, and I really wanted this sort of validation from the industry before I put out my own work in the world. And so what I would say is that the Band's Visit gave me the validation that I needed, or sort of the industry cred to be like, okay, that's it. I'm doing this thing and I'm going to make it happen. And as I said, bring you back to that image of me, in my dressing room and with a Tony Award in a vape in a bottle, and the complete dissonance between what the world saw and how I was feeling. And so I ended up getting a lot of sort of reinforcement about my speech, the Tonys, and people were just sort of feeling really seen by the narrative of hiding your background. And so I ended up meeting this writing coach I was connected to, whose name is Gretchen Cryer. And I would, between my matinee and evening shows, bike up to her place on Upper West Side, and I would start sharing bits of my story. And when anything was interesting to her, she'd be like, "Oh, darling, that's wonderful. Write that. And and that's who Gretchen was. And so we created this first draft. And I read it for my managers and to my friends and the producer of the band's visit. And the producer, Oren Wolf, said, go get a director. Go get a director. And he said, go get Tony Taccone. He's the best. And so I emailed Tony and I said, hey, man, I have this story. And he said, cool, send me a draft. And I sent it to him. And he emailed me back, said, good job getting it on paper. I have questions about the dramatic spine. And we met at the Public Theater in the lobby, and he gave me 3 hours of notes. And he said, I can't tell you that I'll direct it, but I'll read another draft. And his notes were about, why is the adult telling this story? Because the show was really centered on a kid who, in the aftermath of 9/11, hid his father and pretended he was half black and half white to survive high school. And he kept saying, why is the adult telling this story? Why are you so obsessed with it? And I was like, it's interesting and I need to tell it. And we started exchanging drafts over the next 2 years. And he kept being like, and every time he said, it like put a dagger into my soul, because I was working hours every day trying to like understand, what does this man want? So we finally get into a workshop at Berkeley Rep called The Ground Floor. And it had been 2 years since we started working, 2.5. And he looks at me one day, and it's clear that if we don't crack something or see eye to eye, like he's going to like walk away. And I need him. He's a master. He's the guy. And he goes, why are you telling the story? What does your character, the narrator, want? And I was like, dude, he wants to feel whole. Whatever. He's like, that's not a want. I was like, what does he want? I was like, I don't know. And then at some point I say, he wants to feel less anxious. He goes, that's interesting. Leave. Go write about that. And I came back the next day, man, with 25 pages. And it unlocked this portal. And we understood at the end of that workshop that it was a story of anxiety. And it was of a guy who, in the highest moment of his life, crashed. And he needed to go on a hunt to understand why and how he could get better. And so it became this very active journey of this narrator who's very open about his anxiety and telling the audience, I'm fucked up and I need to understand why, and I need to get better, because if I don't, I'll die. And the narrator then weaves through the story of the past, looking for how did he get here. And the character thinks that the whole time he thinks, I'm going to solve this. I'm going to solve this somehow, some way. Medicine's going to fix it. Weed will fix it. Meditation will fix it. Running away will fix it. Calling myself American will fix it. Until ultimately, spoiler alert, the character realizes that nothing will fix it other than holding hands with it. And, that's, I think it's a story that a lot of people come to with this thing. And it's really hard to come to grips with that, because you're so desperate to feel normal, and you're so desperate to feel safe and to feel like you belong. And life isn't binary like that, And so, we opened the first run in July 2023. And the story is about coming to grips with anxiety and coming to grips with this, with this, in the central relation, let's say the father, and how he hid his father, but it's easier to say he, for years. And so we opened it at Berkeley, and 3 months after that, October 7th happened. And we're trying to get this thing produced in New York, and I'm meeting with artistic directors and producers, and everyone said, yeah, but is October 7th in there? Get that in there. Get that in there, huh? An Arab Jew, get it in there, squeeze it in there. And it feels like there's this political agenda on this story that we work so hard to crack. And so the last 2 years have been about understanding the conditional nature of identity, right? And how I thought when I opened the play at first that 9/11 was the last time that I would wrestle that deeply with my identity. And boom, the world says no. And so it went from I'm really wanting to hide that I'm Arab to I really feel uncomfortable as a Jew. And cracking the play back open, and it became like it's the same play, but it's not, you know, and it's a living, breathing autobiography. So a lot has happened in the last 2 years that have radically impacted my life and in the lives of many people in my community. And so figuring out how to weave that in and again, still center what we discovered, which is a guy who's trying to make peace with himself, is why it's taken this long.
Wow. Wow. I'm just letting this sit for a second because
Yeah.
that's intense and it's a lot to work with. We're going to take a quick break for a few commercials. All right, everyone. Welcome back to the episode. Are you constantly looking for rewrites, or are you just trying to like get this set like any other normal
Dude,
show?
the reason why I'm not in person at your studio is because we have been going through rewrites so extensively that I lost my voice in the final run through the last week,
Oof.
and everyone was exhausted. And if I'm being candid with you, the reason why we were exhausted is because, again, I was dealing with the very thing I told you I didn't want to deal with, which is what is my truth? What is this story that I really need to tell? And how do I then minimize the noise, the expectation, the political pressure, the cultural pressure, the representation pressure that I feel, and clear the noise to tell the story that we set out to tell? And coming to New York as a Jewish person, it's a lot of pressure. And I really leaned on my team, my director, my dramaturg to help me deal with the anxiety of that and deal with the anxiety of like, no. Remember what we're after. Remember what this play is. And, you know, that's why the therapy is important, man. I mean, I don't know what to say. I can't be somebody who is writing for a political agenda. I'm writing a story about a guy for me. And so what's funny is that I got these notes after my last run before we opened here, and I went nuts. I was writing 10 hours a day, like, oh, I gotta check it. And we'd already got really good reviews and people really like the story. So I come back and I read this, and my director's like, you trying to ruin the play? No, I'm trying to make it like, don't fix what ain't broke. And so what you end up learning is that the tiniest surgical changes have seismic impacts for a play. And so what ended up being 8 hours a day and probably 50 pages I threw out in service of 5 lines.
Wow. And those 5 lines are exactly what you need. Yeah.
And you need to go through the 50 pages to understand what are the most essential ingredients that need to be expressed. And you know, so what we haven't spoken about just yet is like coming from it as an actor and then writing. That is its own thing.
Well, let's
a journal entry.
Yeah, let's go there. Because you're writing. You have to write dialogue. You have to write something that's engaging for the audience, so you know how to convey when somebody else has written that. But it is, how did you approach that for this scenario?
Well, so one of the things that I was most natural for me as an actor since I was a kid was like mimicking voices, and part of that came from the OCD and being bilingual. And so I would hear sounds and voices and be able to do them. And then, of course, my lifeline in high school was pretending to be a different race. And so I became really, really good at voices and hearing dialogue. And so the easiest thing for me in the world to do was the dialogue, was the scenes. I remember it like memory, and I play them, and that was easy. That is completely different than creating a piece of drama and creating a dramatic arc. And so that, when I talked about the process with my director of like, what does your character want? That was the hardest part. I can tell you 100 interesting scenes from my life. My dad's really funny, and here's a really crazy thing that happened in high school, but a story.
Yeah. With a beginning, a middle, and an end.
And people think that, well, it's your life, so you know that's easier. You have the source material. I think it's harder because how do you distill that? How do you tell that as a story? And there's a lot of things that feel important to me that don't fit the story. And then there's, well, right now something feels really important to me, but does that fit into the story?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, these guys, God bless them. Madeline Oldham, my dramaturg, shout out, shout out, shout out. She was the dramaturg at Berkeley for years. She ran the Ground Floor project under Tony Taccone when he was artistic director there. Oh, she's been through the ringer. Because I will come in and I'll be like, I have this thing. And they're like, no, it doesn't work. And it will take me sometimes weeks to understand what they see because I feel so passionate about it. And, you know, so the how lean you need to be and how you need to mine for the things that show and don't tell was very non-intuitive for me. I want to tell. I want a sermon, not playwriting, you know? And so like, again, that's where the 50 pages is distilled into 5. How do you show it? And you're mining through all of these things to find out how do I serve the story. So, you know, it was like really trying to understand what language works on stage. And you know, I after my last run, I got a book deal with an agent. And so now when I come and they're like, put it in your book and get it off of our stage. And so I was lucky enough to really have masters mentor me and guide me every step of the way. And it's a testament to how much they believed in my story. And I suppose believe in me as a performer because my director said if you weren't as good of an actor as you were, like I would have ran a long time ago. So trial by fire, you know, and it's just people don't really understand that in order to you go to a show and you see something and you're like, that looks kind of obvious. People don't understand that like every sentence, sometimes a word is a 5-hour argument. The difference between can and will. What does it say about the character? And so I would say that the journey of being lean and of being efficient and of understanding the structure, ongoing journey.
Yeah, trial by fire completely, because you're going to a very vulnerable place in a very vulnerable performance method while still trying to figure out how to do both.
Yeah.
So you're building the plane while you're flying it.
Yeah. And exactly. And but listen, man, you know, here's the irony of it all, of course. People say, if you're so anxious, which I'm anxious, why are you going on stage by your, like, that is like the most torturous thing you could do for yourself. Why the fuck would you do that? Here's the funny thing. When you have as much feeling as I do inside, and I feel and I have so much intensity, like almost all the time, that using every part of myself, my brain, my body, my soul, my spirit, is the most relaxing thing I can do in some way. And so by the end of the show, I am like a wet rag, and it's like a sedative. It is a sedative. It's like I feel so cleansed because that is the space for all of the intensity that I feel and I have felt can just live. And so I like that. I feel alive. And so going back to like, well, why did you want to write this thing? And my agents would always, like, when I wanted to talk, they were like, you know, I was getting auditions for these movies and they like didn't understand. I was like, no, I have this play I want to write. And they're like, no, money.
Yeah, money.
And it's because it is just the greatest way to just like stretch yourself as a human.
Wow. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, well, I've been all over the place. I don't even know if anyone is glean anything from what I've said.
No, you haven't been. I mean, you're talking about how you feel, which is what this whole podcast is about. But it's interesting. I mean, you're saying like you're writing all this stuff. It's not journaling, it's writing dialogue, it's performing and whatnot. And that's something that people have been recommending to me for years is to journal, is to just write it down, like modern day diary. And to be able to express that, it gives you this perspective. It gives you, like we've said catharsis many times, but it gives you this ability to put things in perspective and to understand things because you can read your own situation back to you as, sort of objectively. And like, and I know I don't want to keep you too much longer because I want to save your voice, but like the, after you've gone through these multiple iterations of the show and you're opening off Broadway and, finally you're getting, more and more steps, like what have you learned about yourself through all of this process? Like, what is this show? What is right? Like you wrote the show because you had to. But why? Yeah. Like, what is the why? What have you learned from this?
The why is that what I've learned is that you have to trust that little voice inside of yourself. I mean, you have to. It's like your intuition doesn't lie to you, and the fortitude and stubbornness that it required to get here, I cannot explain to you. I cannot explain to you how many times it would have been easier to be like, fuck it, get me on a cop show. But I couldn't, but I couldn't do it because this voice kept pushing me and telling me, this is your purpose. This is your purpose. This is your purpose. And, but what I've really learned is that, very cliche, but that I'm me and I can only be me and that the world is going to keep changing. And that my response to it is only to just be me. And it's sometimes a radical act to accept yourself. And that's what the play has done. I mean, it's just helped me to sort of like look at myself, accept the contradictions, and accept the things that I think are not so pretty and not the best, but they're me. It's a journey of a guy trying to make sense of his life, and what he comes to is that like this is who I am. And for anyone who is really struggling with anxiety, I remember shortly after I won the Tony Award, I was on my way to present at an award show, and I had this beautiful SUV that was sent for me, and I was high, and I was so ashamed in the back of that car. Like I'm in the best moment of my life and I'm high right now and I'm going to go get on stage and I'm going to be a little high because that is the only way and I was so ashamed. And I thought, why the fuck do I have this body that just like can't be around people without like sweating? And why do I need to do this? I was so angry. And 2 days ago, I shouldn't say this. I did a really big interview 2 days ago. And I went and I was not high and I was a little anxious and I brought my little sweat rag and I went into the interview and I told the reporter, I said, just so you know, I'm going to have my little sweat rag with me, but let's keep pushing through. Right. And on the way to that interview, I was not ashamed. I knew, I was like, you know what? I'm a special person. My body gets excited. That's who I am. But on the flip side, I'm doing what I love. I get to tell a story that moves people. And hopefully by being real about what I'm going through, I can let other people feel safe to be real about themselves. And so the lesson for me and for anyone else who is struggling with anxiety is that the journey towards holding hands with it is slow. It's painstaking. You're probably going to not get the outcome that you really hope for, which is the elimination of symptoms and the elimination of feelings. But I'm living proof that your perspective on it can change. And if your perspective on it can change, you can feel freer and you can look at these things that feel so shameful. It's just part of who you are. That's what I've learned.
That's beautiful. And I think a wonderful place to flip to our ending mode. And I haven't looked at my notes once. Literally, my notes in front of me. Yeah, this has been great. This has been so damn good. I did my intro and then I've been looking up the whole time. All right, so let me find.
You're the best, man. I've loved this conversation. I'm sorry. I've even felt myself just going all over the place, but you know, sometimes it'd be like that.
So we've got 60 seconds up on the clock for Plot in 60 Seconds, a little wind down game I like to do at the end of the episodes. I have 17 musicals in front of me on a list. Give me a number 1 through 17. It will correspond to a musical I have, and then you have 60 seconds to give me the plot to that musical.
What if I don't know it?
Then you make it up.
Okay.
This is meant to cause fun anxiety, so have some fun with this.
I'll
These are
sweat through it, man.
Yeah, all right. So give me a number 1 through 17.
15.
15 is Company. Go.
60 seconds remaining.
Company is about a man or a woman, depending on how you cast Bobby, who is facing an existential crisis on their 35th birthday. They can't seem to figure out what they want from their
45
life. They
seconds
don't know if they
remaining.
want to have kids and marry or have a single life. And there's this birthday party and there's all these friends, and all the friends have all these different perspectives. And then we learn that marriage can be fun. We learn that it sucks. We learn that being single sucks. We learn that it can be awesome. And
30
then
seconds
there's
remaining.
these beautiful songs, Being Alive, Earl Esparza, Katrina Lank. That's part of the plot for sure. Ty Benson, my buddy, that's also part of the plot. And then there's 100,000 people, and there's
15
dating,
seconds
and
remaining.
there's like, it's just the existential thing about being life. And the reason why I relate to it is because I'm 34, I'm going to be 35, and I love life, and I don't know what the hell I want to do for my future, but I know that
5,
being human is awesome.
4, 3,
I love that. That was
2,
great.
1.
That was good. I'll go with that one. Okay. So my 3 standard closing questions. The first one simply is just what motivates you?
Growing.
Growing. All right. And I think you've probably answered this next question in a million different ways in this interview, but what advice would you give to your younger self and younger people starting out now and down a similar path?
Go on the journey. Keep going. One foot in front of the other.
All
Don't
right.
give up.
Last question then. Hardest one. If you could only see one show for the rest of your life, but you can see it as many times as you want, what would you see?
Oh, Fela.
What is it?
Fela.
What is that? I've never heard of it.
Fela was a musical. It was my favorite musical while I was in college. It was about a Nigerian musician, Fela Kuti. And it had the best, it was the guy who created Afrobeat. It was on Broadway. And I just love the groove. I love the Afrobeat.
Oh, I'm going to have to see if I can find a
Is it
slime tutorial.
Sar, I don't know how to pronounce it. Sar Naguya. I don't know how to say his last name, but he was the lead. He was unbelievable.
I'm going to see if I can find a slime tutorial online or...
My first thing was like Hamilton, but I was like, that's too obvious, so I won't do it.
Yeah, no.
So in my resistance, I said Fela.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
So everybody, please go check out Other at the Greenwich House Theater down in that's Soho, right? In Lower...
It's on 7th and Bleecker. It's in the Village.
27 Barrow Street, the Village. That's what it is. All right. First preview October 8th, opening night October 19th. And it's a limited run going through December 6th only. So everybody check this out. And where can we connect with you online and share our own stories with you?
Other the Play and Ariel Stachel on Instagram and TikTok.
All right. And I am on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Threads. I don't know. I'm on the places. Gosh, I'm just, find me online. Leave a rating, leave a review or a comment if you're watching this on Spotify. Thanks to Jukebox the Ghost for the intro and outro music. Thanks to WelcomeToTimesSquare.com for the lovely use of this studio. And Ariel, thank you so much, man. This has been a vulnerable and very honest conversation, and I thank you for it.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much.
Take a deep breath, make the world a little colorful.